Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about UK politics and Brexit from an outside view, although I do know the UK from the inside as well. But Brexiteers still claim today that Brexit has brought them freedom, great opportunities, and of course sovereignty. And they particularly like to argue that they can conclude much better trade agreements without the EU. So let's take a look at these successes, and today we will compare the trade agreements with Japan. The UK-Japan trade agreement, which came into force on January 1st in 2021, offers advantages for Great Britain, especially compared to the trading conditions they imagine. But there are disadvantages in the UK-Japan trade agreement for Great Britain compared to the EU-Japan agreement. And in this video, I want to bring you some of the key points I mean with that. First, there are the different access conditions for the services sector. With the UK-Japan agreement, we will start here. The UK-Japan trade agreement grants British service providers access to the Japanese market, but not to the same extent as the EU-Japan agreement. And access to certain services, such as financial services and professional services, is more restricted or involves higher regulatory requirements. And in all those cases, I will have examples. For example, a UK company offering business consulting or financial services will encounter more bureaucratic hurdles or specific requirements that have not been relaxed as generously as in the EU-Japan agreement. And we will also always have a look at the EU-Japan agreement here, because we need to talk about the access conditions for services there as well. The EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement includes detailed rules that facilitate access for EU service providers. And this includes, among other things, comprehensive market access rules and harmonization of standards specifically tailored to EU service providers. For example, EU financial service providers have easier access to the Japanese market and benefit from fewer regulatory hurdles due to more comprehensive negotiations. The experience comes in here as well. And we have to talk about less market access for certain sectors. And first, once again, in the UK-Japan agreement. In the UK-Japan agreement, certain trade benefits and access conditions are less extensive, particularly in areas such as the automotive industry or the high technology. And the terms have been renegotiated, and they are less advantageous in some areas. Because UK car manufacturers, for example, face higher export tariffs and less comprehensive market openings compared to their EU competitors here. We must not forget the EU-Japan deal was there before Brexit, and the British had to renegotiate that. The EU has negotiated deeper access terms that offer more comprehensive benefits for different sectors. The EU-Japan EPA offers better terms for access to Japanese markets for a variety of products and sectors. And that, for example, means that EU car manufacturers benefit from lower tariffs and better market openings, as the EU has received more comprehensive concessions here. And we have to talk about the different regulatory standards and the harmonization here. Once again, we start with the UK-Japan agreement. The agreement contains specific regulatory requirements that have been adapted for the UK. These adaptations differ from the provisions in the EU-Japan agreement, and that leads to additional requirements or hurdles in this case. It sounds a bit complicated, but that's why I always have these examples. Differences in food standards make food trade difficult if British products do not meet the specific requirements of the Japanese market, for example. And that easily happens. But we also have the EU-Japan agreement, and the EU has achieved a deeper regulatory harmonization, making trade easier, and it makes it easier for European companies to access. And uniform standards do, of course, reduce trade barriers. As example, EU companies benefit from this better harmonization of standards, making trade more efficient and, to be honest, more straightforward. And as I did yesterday already, we have to talk about the limited bargaining power of the UK. And that also means that the UK negotiated the agreement as a single country, which results in a weaker bargaining power compared to the EU as a large economic bloc. And because of that, the UK has not been able to obtain as many concessions from Japan or negotiate as comprehensive benefits as the EU could. I mean, the EU is an area with 450 million people, and the EU as a large economic bloc as well has much more bargaining power and has therefore been able to negotiate on the one side more comprehensive, but on the other side more advantageous terms. And the EU has been able to obtain better conditions for access to the Japanese markets and better regulations for specific industries. But there are also some limitations on negotiating terms and the transitional arrangements. And once again, when we talk about the UK, the agreement is partly based on the European EPA, but it contains specific adjustments for the UK, not always to their advantage. And these adjustments did introduce additional uncertainties and challenges. For example, there are transitional arrangements or specific adjustments that created additional bureaucracy and uncertainties for UK companies that have still not been resolved as comprehensively as in the agreement the EU negotiated earlier. And that's why I still prefer the EU-Japan agreement. Because the EU agreement contains more stable and comprehensive arrangements as it is longer established, and it even has developed over the years. For example, if some EU companies, they do benefit from a more mature and better developed trading framework that, with that, of course, also offers more stable conditions. And overall, the UK-Japan trade agreement offers some advantages for the UK, but there are specific disadvantages compared to the EU-Japan agreement. And these disadvantages include limited access for certain services, lower market access in some sectors, differences in regulatory standards, lower bargaining power, and potential challenges from specific adjustments and transitional arrangements. And these differences arise mainly from the fact that the UK negotiated the agreement as a single country, while the EU acted as a large economic bloc. And as I said yesterday and many times before, together we are stronger, and that just stays the truth. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.